The restless spirit of old Hank continues to haunt the county jail to the intense disquietude of 2 or 3 of the inmates. The spirit ought to have better manners than it nightly exhibits, but there is no use of quarreling with a ghost. Joseph Young, generally called Frenchie, is a petite larceny man who remains in the corridor and does duty in various capacities. After dark on Monday evening, he had the occasion to go to the back part of the jail and was suddenly confronted with the spirit or apparition of old Hank. He didn't wait to inquire how it got in or what in the thunder it wanted, but he left very suddenly for more salubrious parts. At a little after 9 o'clock on Monday evening, that being the hour when old Hank had died, the man Blake heard a pounding over his cell, and soon afterwards the unmistakable voice of old Hank. He addressed himself especially to Blake because Blake was looking directly at him from his cell. When Cahill died and the last human being he gazed upon was Blake. He reiterated the statement made on the day before that he was in purgatory and asked Blake and the other boys in the jail to pray for him. He said he would have to remain in his present abode for a few months and suffer terrible pain, do penance, and receive the aid of his earthly friends. Blake asked him if he had seen anything of Gilbert and Rosecrans since he had followed them to the other world. Cahill replied that Gilbert was the first to come forward and meet him when he entered the realms of purgatory after his death. In fact, Gilbert was the only man he knew among the thousands there. The whereabouts of Rosecrans were unknown to the ghostly visitant. He had asked Gilbert about him, but he knew nothing. He said his last remembrance of the earth was standing with the black cap over his face, awaiting the warning twitch which would announce to him that he and his partner had ended their earthly lives. Suddenly he felt a thrill run through his frame, a feeling without pain and rather pleasant, and succeeded by a peaceful feeling of rest, ending in unconsciousness, which appeared to him like it had extended over the ages. When he recovered his senses, he found himself in purgatory. He asked where he was and what had happened to him. His mind was blank for a moment, and he was so confused that he could not readily gather his senses. The people with whom he found himself informed him that he had been killed on a scaffold for murder in Leadville, Colorado, situated on the earth, and a man named Rosecrans had died with him at the same time. He was informed that he had been judged, and he was assigned to this place, which was called purgatory, and after he had been thoroughly purged of his sins, he would be allowed to enter heaven, and would have no more sufferings after that. Cahill asked Gilbert for his remembrance of when he last saw Rosecrans, and he replied that he had a confused remembrance of being parted from Rosecrans by somebody after they had left the world. They appeared to be standing together on a wide plain, but if they interchanged any words, he does not remember it. He could remember that Rosecrans wore the same look of sadness and fear which he had last noticed on his face on the scaffold, but as to himself, he felt more wonder and perplexity, doubt and curiosity than anything else. Suddenly, he and Rosecrans were separated. How, he cannot tell. He has no remembrance of succeeding events until he discovered himself in his present place, purgatory. Cahill said Gilbert bore himself with the same fortitude that he had manifested in the closing scenes of his earthly life, and although he was compelled to suffer fearful tortures, bore them bravely. He was a favorite with the purgatorians and with the officers in charge of the institution. When he asked why Gilbert did not come back to earth and see his old comrades, old Hank replied that Gilbert was not as restless as he was himself, but might yet return to earth for a brief time. The Herald reporter asked Mr. Blake, the man who had conducted the interview with Old Hank, if he was positive it was Old Hank's voice that he had heard talking. It might not have been some prisoner talking and impersonating Old Hank. Blake said he was positive that it was Hank's voice. He was no spiritualist and did not believe in the wandering of spirits from the other world around this barren earth, but he is positive that it was Old Hank's voice that he heard on Sunday and Monday evenings. The voice came from above the cells, where every prisoner in the jail was confined in the various cells below. He was positive that he was not mistaken, and there was no ventriloquist in the prison. The voice could not have come from the corner it did unless it came from the throat of its owner, but nobody about the jail could intimidate the voice of the dead man as perfectly as was done on the 2 occasions mentioned. The cellmates of Blake, a German named Bismarck, is also satisfied that the voice was of Old Hank. Young, the Frenchman, is also doubly satisfied of it, and added some other statements of unaccountable noises, like the creaking of doors being heard at times when there are no doors open or locked, and he is positive that the shade which so suddenly confronted him when he went to draw water on Monday evening was the spirit of Cahill, and that it was not, as the Herald reporter suggested, a hallucination of the brain or an opposition conjured up by a diseased imagination or the affectation of the nervous system. Old Hank or somebody else is having a good time in the county jail, and if Kate Armistead finds out there's a ghost prowling around within easy reaching distance of her midnight pillow, there will be sudden music in the air. Mark the prediction. Leadville Weekly Herald, August 13th, 1881.